Hey folks, friendly reminder that this is part 3 of a 3-part video essay which I highly recommend watching in order. So just in case you're stumbling upon this one first, I'll leave a link to part 1 in the description below. I hope you enjoy. Welcome to the mind of Vella Wilde. Earlier in this video, I mentioned that I'd explain what a mind dungeon is at some point, and let's do that right now. So throughout the game, there are 3 mind dungeons you visit: Alex's, the Essentia 2000's, and Vella's. And basically what they are is someone's personality, life story, aspirations, deepest darkest secrets, and emotional baggage personified as a dungeon. If you've ever played Psychonauts, it's basically identical to how that game themes its levels, but it's an RPG dungeon instead. And this is the mind dungeon of Vella. At this point in the story, your party is looking for the mystical Ultima LP legend, and then you realize that, the record has actually not released yet. You also then discover that the song was written by Vella herself in a different reality, and she's a bit embarrassed by it, since, everyone's a bit embarrassed by their previous works. This is actually why she told Alex not to look for it when he asked her about it near the start of the game. However, Vella then has a change of heart and volunteers to take everyone into her own mind. This is the mind dungeon of Vella Wilde, and it is, without a doubt, the best part of the game. Let's talk a little bit about how this dungeon is structured first. Let's go all, Mark Brown on this. So, when you first arrive, you're dropped into a large concert hall with tables and guests milling about. The stage is empty, and you find the manager complaining about how the entire band is missing, and he tasks you with finding them before the concert starts. There's no time limit here, you have all the time you need, but you need to find a singer, a drummer, a guitarist, a pianist, which is he calls a piano player for some reason, and a bassist in order to complete the dungeon. There are 8 doors around the perimeter of the concert hall that lead to various areas. Some make sense as to where they lead, and some don't. Behind each of these doors contain puzzles, key items, or clues to complete the dungeon, and occasionally even one of the band members. A pretty simple setup, but it gets everything right and manages to be incredibly creative. I love how you're not explicitly told where to go. This place almost feels like an adventure game at times of how often you need to talk with people and collect information to then double back with. Speaking of which, I really like the dialogue in this part of the game. Everyone has a bit of an annoyed tongue-in-cheek attitude that doesn't devolve into that unnecessary dark humor that tends to take you out of it a bit. I think a really good example of this is Vella's dad. Yeah, you actually find Vella's father at one point in this dungeon. You see a fat guy sleeping on some stairs impeding your way into one of the doors, so you take an item called a pokey flute and, stab him with it to wake him up. That's actually a pretty funny and subversive reference. His whole deal is that he apparently has a habit of oversleeping and missing Vella's concerts, and since you're not done with the dungeon yet as of the time you talk to him, he takes this as the perfect opportunity to make up for it all and make sure he sees this one by any means necessary. So the game does the awful dad trope here, but it doesn't go too dark with it. Instead, he's just a lazy guy who, even past his shortcomings, still wants to support his daughter. It's surprisingly wholesome, actually. There's also a bar in this hall that has this fishbowl-headed robot that I think is a reference to another indie game called Read Only Memories. Hey, is that game good, by the way? All I know about it is that Jim Sterling likes it. Oh dang, I did a quick Google search and apparently that game references Y2K. Are these devs friends of each other? I love it when developers do that sort of thing, it's so fun. This dungeon is weird in the best kinds of ways. It's abstract, yet everything is either related to music or music production, or as a reference to Vella's inner fears or personalities. There's this cool puzzle where you find a balloon of her face on it and it quizzes you about her before letting you past. You then need to find other Vellas throughout the mind dungeon who will disclose slightly personal information about her that you need to know to get past this balloon, like her fear of getting fat or her turn-ons. Something you might imagine this dungeon would have a problem with is backtracking, because yeah, you do need to run back and forth a lot in this dungeon. However, here's the thing about that. Most of the doors in the main room are no more than 1 or 2 rooms big, and then after you've completed them, you can kind of check them off your little mental list and not have to commit any more memory to it. Enemies also don't respawn in this dungeon too, which is super cool when you're almost guaranteed to have to retrace your steps at least once. This is actually something the whole game does, to be honest, but it's especially appreciated here. Another awesome thing about this dungeon is that, well, there are no cutscenes. I mean, there are NPCs and wacky characters to meet, but what I mean is, like, no one in your main party ever comments on the weird, following the third aspect. Like, Alex actually lets up for once and lets you enjoy the game on your own pace. It's very organic. The dungeon isn't perfect though, however, my problems with it are very minor. Firstly, I'm not really a fan of the monsters in this dungeon. A lot of them are copy-pasted from other areas, which I have gone over before. This whole game kind of has a problem with that. There actually is one unique monster that's introduced here, and it's, a fetus for some reason. Honestly, it kind of reminds me of the fetus creature from Pokemon Clover. I think the ending missed out on a couple big missed opportunities as well. Like I said, the dungeon ends when you get all of the band members and they play their song, opening a door to where you find the mystical Ultima LP Legend. However, remember when I said that Vella's dad really wanted to see this concert? Well, he's not in the crowd here for some reason. And trust me, I did look pretty hard for him. Something kind of interesting is that while the Vella band plays their song, the crowd is actually booing them, which might be symbolic of how cynical she is of her own musical talent. I kind of wish you could have found the dad somewhere in the crowd and he'd be like the only one cheering her on or something. That would have been a really awesome and wholesome way to end this entire dungeon. There's also no boss in it at all, but that's not really a negative. Not every video game dungeon needs a boss. So yeah, that's the mind of Vella Wilde. Without a doubt the best part of the game, and honestly, it might be one of the best RPG dungeons I've played in a very long time. I really wish there was more stuff like this in the game, because everything about this place just captures that Earthbound magic that makes these games fantastic. Let's talk about some more cool stuff. You know what never fails to wow me in this game? The aesthetic. As in, the really creative visuals as well as the music. Whenever I see a video game set out to invoke 80s or 90s nostalgia, typically what they do is pixel art, because, you know, who doesn't love some good pixel art? Y2K, however, instead has a 90s style based off of not pixel art, but early CGI. You know, the kind of stuff you'd see in music videos of the era, or early PlayStation games. I'm kind of surprised I don't see this particular aesthetic replicated more often, because it looks really cool when done right, and this game is a really good example of that. The music is fantastic as well. Something else you'll notice on a lot of Earthbound-likes is that they often have an enormous diversity of songs, spanning across multiple different genres and tones. Heck, they even got multiple really good composers to help work on this one. Did you know that Toby Fox did a battle theme for this game? Yeah, the Undertale guy. I guess someone on the dev team knew him and paid him a bit to make a song for the game. It's called Into the Mind if you want to look it up. It's actually pretty good. I actually have a bit of a weird story about Toby Fox's involvement in this game, actually. Apparently he, tweeted about the game, showing support for it when it came out, as you'd expect from someone who contributed to a project. But then after reviews got super mixed about it, he, deleted the tweet. Oh god, that's gotta be bad from a morale standpoint. Anyway, back to the music. Let it be a good sign for this game's soundtrack that the Toby Fox theme isn't even my favorite battle theme in the game. That title probably belongs to Hipsterbound, and yes, there is a battle theme in this game called Hipsterbound. Pushing Through is pretty awesome. There's even a battle theme in this game that's, orchestrated for some reason. Also, is it bad that I like the theme of the Golden Alpaca? If you remove the stigma surrounding that battle, it's really goofy and fun. There's a lot of battle themes in Y2K if you can't tell. This is also something you see in a lot of Earthbound-likes. I mean, just look at games like Mother 3 that literally have 50 unique tracks for battles alone. This is something I think more games should do in general. I just love context-specific battle themes in RPGs. You know what else I really like? The voice acting. Now, this is going to be more of a contentious take, I feel, because I've actually seen a lot of people criticize the voice work in this game, specifically from Alex and Hogarth, who are just accused of overacting way too much.
What is happening to me? What's happening to me? Michael!
No, the voice acting there was scream crying.
Hey, Alex.
Yeah, it's not perfect, but when the voice work hits home, it does a fantastic job of portraying what the character is feeling and thinking. And also, literally every cutscene in the game is voiced. There's like 2 exceptions to this, but like, oh my god, guys, that's something you rarely see in AAA games, let alone an indie one. My personal favorite voice performance in this game is probably a tie between Anthony Sardina as Claudio. Like, I love his energy he brings to this role, like you can tell he had a lot of fun with it, and the voice of Rory. Now, okay, I gotta tell a story here real quick. During the rough draft of the script, I was going to make a joke here about how I like Rory because he sounds like a YouTuber I would watch, and that's, because, and I can't unhear this now, he actually is voiced by a YouTuber I would watch. He's voiced by a guy named Yuri of Wind. If you've never heard of this guy before, he does videos on video game trivia as well as ratings of really awful creepypastas. He does really fun stuff, and I totally recommend him. Speaking of Rory, by the way, there's something else I would like to talk a bit about regarding him. Now, remember when I was doing the plot summary, I mentioned that at one point you have the chance to apologize to Rory for awful things you said about his sister, and that has a pretty big impact on something. We're going to be talking about that now, and fair warning, it's kinda dark, yet unlike a lot of dark stuff in this game, they somehow make it work here. Now, I also have to mention here that I did not experience any of this personally, like any of the stuff I'm about to talk about, during my playthrough. And I don't feel like playing through the game again to get footage of it, can you blame me? I'm going off of experiences and images I've seen from other players, so just acknowledge that I'll probably get some information wrong here. I am doing my best though. So, if you refuse to apologize to Rory at this point in the game, and then subsequently are a bit of a dick to him whenever the game allows you to be, Rory kills himself. During the Golden Alpaca scene, he mentioned that he's been thinking of taking his own life, and depending on your actions, he can actually go through with it. Now, people seem to have really mixed feelings on this plot point, but personally, I think it's kinda interesting how this whole thing is handled. Your actions having effects on optional stuff is nothing new to RPGs, but I can't think of a single time off the top of my head and another game where being a dick has the potential to permanently remove a character from your party like this. It really just makes you stop and think and reflect. I have to say too that something about how this game handles this subject matter is oddly haunting somehow in a way that I actually respect quite a bit. Suicidal characters in fiction are often just stereotyped as being edgy and sad all the time, yet Rory is a lot more three-dimensional than that. Yuri's fantastic performance as him definitely helps a lot here. When the morning of the final chapter begins, you apparently get a call from Vella telling you that Rory took his own life. It comes out of nowhere, especially since it didn't really seem like much was leading up to it, but here's the thing about that. That's kind of how this sort of thing works in real life. Like, life just seems normal and then one day, he's just gone now. Alex also stops and thinks for a while to question, oh, is this my fault somehow? Could I have done something differently to prevent this? And I mean, the answer is yes, and he is kind of a dick about it because of course he is, but again, it's hauntingly realistic. This is the kind of thing someone would think to themselves in this situation. Apparently you can check your computer around this point too and find a final message, sort of a manifesto that Roy writes right before taking his own life. It reads very erratically and out of character, which might make you instinctively criticize the game for it, but you have to keep in mind that people act very strangely when they feel like they're backed into a corner and have no other options like this. I also really respect that this game doesn't show his suicide on screen either. Oh, I get the argument that showing a suicide scene brings attention to the horror of the situation, and I do generally disagree that it likewise glorifies suicide, but you gotta admit that showing it wouldn't have been that realistic, especially since the whole game is from Alex's point of view. It also keeps you speculating too. There are problems with this whole plot point, like you got the Golden Alpaca scene that introduces the whole thing that I spent a bunch of time on earlier, but when you look at the greater whole of this scenario, Rory's potential suicide is a lot more realistically and even respectfully written than you normally see in fiction. I hate to suggest something like this, but it's so well portrayed that I can't help but wonder if this entire scenario is based on a true story somehow. Like, maybe one of the devs knew a friend like Rory and he wanted to let the player feel the way he felt. I don't get this feeling often when I play games, but this is a really good example of that. Good on you guys, because this is not an easy topic to discuss in fiction. Speaking of dark topics that are difficult to discuss in fiction, there are a few other examples of the game occasionally bringing up touchy subject matter and actually making it work. Let's use this scene around the midpoint of the game as an example. So we just finished talking with Mark, and the guys are discussing what they're supposed to do next. But then, the conversation shifts to a story told by Claudio and Chandra. They apparently had a younger brother at one point, a kid named Aaron, and Aaron mysteriously vanished one day and never returned. They then talk about how they got the police involved, however, they weren't able to find him. But then, out of nowhere, Chandra says this.
You act like they even tried. A 4-year-old black kid goes missing in a shit neighborhood, and you think they really tried? I'm sure if Aaron had been a beautiful white woman, everyone would have cared that he vanished.
And wow, that is not where I was expecting this conversation to eventually go. Racial injustice in the legal and justice system is an extremely complicated topic that's still even relevant today. Kind of like the weird racism joke I hit earlier, this too comes out of nowhere. And like Claudio, Chandra also doesn't bring attention to anyone's race at any point. However, unlike that scene, it takes on a brand new meaning here. It doesn't feel like this topic is being brought up just to be edgy or to virtue signal, but instead because it's something that's probably been on Chandra's mind for over a decade now. They don't spend much time on this topic, but I still really respect that the game isn't afraid to bring up a subject like this. There's another example of something like this a bit later in the game where the party is looking for the Essentia 2000. Their adventures take them to a water tower, and while you're there, Rory and Hogarth bring up a story about how a woman was mysteriously found drowned inside of it, and it was done in such a way that it's very likely to have been a murder. However, the story as a whole eventually fizzled, and they didn't find the potential murderer because the journalist who broke the story focused more on the poor water quality over the next couple of days than anything having to do with a murder. Like, as if that was just a footnote, which is a commentary on journalism ethics. Journalists have a lot of power as the ones who break a story to the general populace, and simply omitting certain facts or even telling straight-up white lies can completely change a narrative for the worst. What was supposed to be a serious article about a horrific murder turned into a simple, fun story about water quality. God, can you imagine if someone tried to weaponize that? Especially since most people nowadays seem to only read the headlines, admit it, you do. Again, a very complex topic, but it's one that's brought up in a scene that makes sense and feels more like friends rambling and ranting than it does a game writer trying to push a narrative or a political view. It's very respectfully done. You know, now that I think about it, maybe this is why games journalists hate this game so much, because it's onto their dirty, dirty tricks. Okay, enough serious stuff. What else is there? Oh! Panda. Panda is like the best realized idea in this entire game, and that's not even a joke. So, is it safe to assume that we all had like a childhood stuffed animal or a toy growing up that we had a lot of sentimental value for, like it was your favorite and maybe you still have it on a display shelf somewhere today? Well, Alex has one of those in the form of Panda, the Panda. Kids aren't great at naming stuff, I guess. You first meet him in Sammy's hotel for some reason, and he joins your team. But not as a party member, but instead as a puzzle tool, as well as an exclusive skill for Alex. You can summon him in battle, and he'll sit in front of the party and tank a few hits. It might be the non-attacking skill I use the most often, to be honest. It's very reliable. That's not all he does, though. Starting the second day, you wake up to the sight of him staring you down and trying to get your butt out of bed. From this point on, there are occasional scenes where he talks with Alex about life stuff, where he typically either chastises him for being lazy or snidely tells him things that he probably should already know. I love the interactions between these two. I mean, Panda may sound a tad too much like a mascot animal from a Seth MacFarlane show for my liking, but he might still have some of my favorite dialogue in the game. He has a personality that I can only describe as a sassy Jiminy Cricket, and it serves as a really good comic relief, as well as a more down-to-earth viewpoint on what players probably actually think of Alex. That alone would make him a pretty compelling character. However, the game, during the last chapter, pulls this really cool plot twist with him as well. Now, I know we've been discussing the plot this entire video, but I like this twist so much that I'm actually gonna put a spoiler warning here. Trust me, I genuinely think it's that creative and worth experiencing that much on your own. So skip here if you care at all. So Panda is often portrayed as a very calm and collected type of character. However, as they're slowly approaching the ending of the game, he seems to start changing a bit. His speech pattern becomes a bit more unhinged, and he starts acting a lot more assertive and aggressive towards Alex. He even starts swearing after a while too, which is not something he does at the start of the game. If you pay close attention, how weird he acts is proportional to how much the world is falling apart. This all builds up until the world actually does end. At this point, Panda's tone becomes downright unsettling.
What are you going to do now? Where do you think the Essentia 2000 is?
Until all that's left is just you and him floating in space together. And then this happens. Oh god, our Panda is still here.
What the fuck?
Panda. I'm so lost. Where do we go? What do we do here? I'm terrified. I miss my friends, my family. What the hell am I gonna do out here all alone?
Alex, I don't have any answers for you. I'm sorry.
You mean you don't have answers? You always have something to say.
Alex,
How am I supposed to know what to do? I'm only a stuffed panda.
I'm only a stuffed
Whoa!
panda. Oh!
Hold on. As he ended that sentence, his voice changed into Alex's. It was all in his head. Panda's talking was all in his head. That's actually kind of cool.
Wow, that's an
that was actually kind of cool. I like that. Man, Panda is like the best part of this game, I swear.
Yeah, that's an M. Night Shyamalan twist right there. They Shyamalan'd us.
His voice changes into Alex's, and he turns lifeless, floating off into space. Holy crap, I was not expecting that. What I personally interpret this twist as is a reveal that in any scene where Alex was talking to Panda, it was actually him talking to himself, or in inner conscious, and that was personified in the form of Panda. It's a cool twist, but it's also one of those kinds of twists that makes you reflect on a lot of stuff you've played up to this point, and can even change your perception a bit on a few things during a potential second playthrough. It's really good stuff. Now at this point we're kind of going to dive into cool idea but not so great execution territory. I still think it's worth mentioning though, because again, this game does actually have a lot of really cool ideas and concepts. Firstly, the concept of Y2K as a force of nature villain might be one of the coolest ideas I've heard in a very long time. Seriously, has there ever been like a disaster movie or something based off of this event? Because like, what some people thought Y2K was going to do to the world occasionally bordered on catastrophic. Seriously, it's something I'm surprised I haven't seen more games or even movies try. The battle system kind of falls into this category too. Hey, we're 2 hours something into a video essay about a video game, you guys finally want to talk about the gameplay? Honestly, there actually is a reason why I haven't brought it up that much until now, and that's, well, the battle system might be one of the least notable things about this game at the end of the day. I get the impression that this is one of those games that wanted to tell a story more than it wanted to be a video game. There's nothing necessarily wrong with that. I mean, hey, there are tons of well-respected games that want to tell a story first and foremost. I mainly word it like this because while the battle system does seem pretty fun at first, Y2K is one of those RPGs that by the final chapter is basically just cutscenes, gimmick fights, and impossible battles. I mean, heck, the final boss you can't even win against traditionally because it's a puzzle fight that's basically Lavos with extra steps. The system itself feels underdeveloped as well. More specifically, its characters in the really bass-ackwards way you level up in this game. Take a character like Claudio, for example. He has a really fun and powerful normal attack which requires you to hold down your action button and let go when this bar lines up with this other bar, and how effective the attack is depends on how close you are to it. And if you perfect this little mini-game, he does a trick shot! And his normal attack hits all enemies, which is super cool. But then you realize that, he only has one special move for some reason. Like, seriously guys, you're gonna make a character based off of hacky sacks and ninja swords and you can only think of a kinda cool attack and one special move for him? I swear, like, half of the cast in this game have no more than 2 special moves. It's really weird, and I don't think their gimmicky normal attacks do enough to justify not having that many. The only 2 characters that feel fleshed out and complete, at least to me, are Alex and Chandra. Alex's moveset is kind of all over the place, which makes sense for a main character, you know, tend to be jack-all-trades kinds of characters. And Chandra has a cool gimmick involving attack multipliers and hula hoop stances. Like, you get a bunch of these stances you can do that increase your attack in exchange for losing a little bit of your health each turn, or a little bit of your magic, or even a party member. You know, stuff like that. She also has chemist abilities such as a skill to use the effect of a single healing item on all 4 party members, which is crucial for one particular boss fight. Fork that 3-headed entity fight, I hate that thing so much. Oh, and speaking of healing items, what the heck is up with these restorative percentages? A personal pizza restores 65% of your health, coffee restores 10% of your health and 50% of your magic. A fettuccine alfredo restores 70% of your health. Why is holy water an item in this game? This is like the least religious RPG I've ever played. A mini tack restores 5% of your health and 15% of your magic. Cheeseburgers restore 45% of your health. Like, would the artistic integrity be lost if that was just a flat 50%? Like, do you see what I'm getting at here? This all might sound like nitpicking, but I don't know, it's just weird to me. Like, this is the kind of crap I would do. There's not even a way to, like, sort the items either. Like, what is this, Gen 1 Pokemon? Getting back to the fighters, there are a lot of instances of characters who have really interesting gimmicks behind them, but the game doesn't really do much with it, or their gimmicks just don't fit this particular game. For example, Rory. Rory is unlike any character I think I've ever used in any RPG. He's a character based around defense, and when I say based around defense, I don't mean that he just has higher defense than other characters. I mean, like, he can't physically deal damage to enemies. His job class is something I can only describe as a peaceful protester. Heck, even his quote-unquote weapon is a protest sign. Instead of dealing damage, a lot of his moveset is based around protecting other party members. Like, he doesn't even have an attack command. Instead, it's replaced with a move that lets you take damage in place of other characters. Kind of a bit like Cover from Final Fantasy, except you have a little bit more control over it. This is a really unique and interesting idea for a character, but the problem is that it doesn't really work in a game like Y2K. The average battle is already kind of lengthy in this game, and you only have 4 party members. So to replace a fourth of the damage you can do with just defense, honestly just makes them drag. It also doesn't work because this game already gives you a way to circumvent damage via this dodging mechanic. So having a character based around tanking even less is just kind of overkill. I swear, if you gave Rory a taunt ability and threw him in a tactics RPG where you have like 10 party members and it's more expected that battles are going to take like 15 minutes at the very minimum, I feel a gimmick character like this would actually be praised for being kind of brilliant. But here, it's just an example of a cool idea not really coming its own. Speaking of defense, I want to take a second to talk about this little minigame. Whenever an enemy attacks you, you get a chance to guard or even dodge an attack entirely. I love a lot of games that use a mechanic like this because it adds just a little more skill to the experience. However, I feel like the game missed an opportunity to be a bit more creative here. There are only 4 types of being attacked minigames in the game. You have these 2, which are fair enough, I guess. You have this really frustrating one of 3 red bars that I swear my entire playthrough I only successfully did like a handful of times. It's really annoying. And then there's this really cool one that you can only see during a single boss fight in the game. During the fight with Yuzu, he has this attack where he puts your character in his laboratory-based thing, and it becomes a platformer for a second as you jump around missiles to dodge them. And if you're able to dodge them, you straight up dodge the attack. This is the only special move of its kind in the game, as well as the only attack minigame that's exclusive to one particular enemy. and I really don't know why. I wish there were more enemy-specific minigames like this, because to be honest, the enemy list does kind of blend in this game after a while, and that would have been a really unique way to make them stand out more. Oh my goodness, I really want to talk about the level up system too, because I swear it is the epitome of a cool idea executed really poorly. So like, traditionally in an RPG, you defeat enemies and this gives you experience, and when your characters in the party gain enough of it, they level up, their stats increase, and they may even learn a new skill. This is how it normally works for one of these games. However, some games try to get a bit more creative with it, and Y2K goes a bit too far here. How you level up in Y2K starts out pretty normal. You kill enemies and this gains you experience. However, that's not enough to level you up. Instead, you sort of stockpile this experience, which you take to a phone, which teleports you into Alex's mind dungeon. Here, you can individually increase your stats, learn new abilities, and then finally level up. And it may be the most needlessly complex thing in this entire game. And yes, that's including the story. You walk into a floor and find these 4 doors. You try to open one of them and are bombarded with this really bad UI. Look at this, you have all your stats plus a question mark for some reason, circles, more stats, mod? A chain, I think? You pick one stat, but that's not enough. You then have to examine the door again to go into that door to get the stat boost you just picked, and you can only pick one stat per door per floor, and the mods are like flat increases. After you're done with that, you then talk to Marlene the Crow, give him 100 experience, and then you level up. And the game expects you to do this for every single level, and the game also does not tell you how this works, or at least to my recollection. This is not needed. Firstly, it's just time-consuming. Going out of your way to find a phone, going into the mind dungeon, going into this door, then going into 4 other separate doors, and then one final door, just to do what most games would just have you do naturally, is a waste of time. Combine this too with the fact that I hear that some versions of this game actually have pretty bad loading times as well, particularly the Switch version, and what you end up with is just a massive waste of time for everyone. The other really annoying thing about all of this is that all of these fancy stat boosts and multipliers you get out of the system are only for Alex. Every other character just level ups naturally with Alex as you go through the mind dungeon. Why would you put a unique system for leveling up in your game if it only applies to one character? Why? This is a failure of how to do this. If you're going to break from the norm to put a unique level up system in your game, it needs to benefit the game in some kind of way. Typically in the form of giving your players more options in how they level up, or splits in how they can build their characters to encourage replayability. This does neither. The only interesting thing this level up system has going for it is as you go through the mind dungeon, you kind of uncover this side plot with the Crow acting as a translator for these puppet people, but I don't think that alone is worth dragging the game's progression system like this. It could have been put elsewhere. As of now, it just only feels like it's there to waste time and be abstract just for the sake of being abstract. So, oh goodness, that did get a bit negative by the end there, didn't it? Honestly, this game does do a lot of really cool things at times, but it does have a lot of great idea but bad execution moments as well. And I can't really be too angry at the game for those, especially as someone who typically likes to see games experiment and be creative, but like, just please have a little restraint next time. Like, please. At this point, I would like to move on to the next topic I have on my big list here, though, and it's one that I have not really been looking forward to, and that's because it has to do with controversy. You know, everyone's favorite subject. I personally don't like talking about controversy in my videos because I feel it always just dates the videos. However, there is one particular instance of this with Y2K that I would personally feel weird if I didn't at least mention it. Some of you who follow gaming news might already know what's coming up here and may even be wondering why I haven't talked about it yet. Well, you little drama llamas, I guess. Here you go.
Okay,
I'm sorry.
this
for
is
all
this
the lies
game's
it told me
redemption arc.
when
Yeah,
I
It
was
actually
this is actually
redeemed
starting
itself.
to pick up a bit. Like,
Yeah,
That
now
would
it's
make
getting
me
but it's
interesting.
picking
all
up
for
because of
nothing.
how weird and stupid
I
it is, not
appreciate
because
I'm
it's
going to go
good.
back
Like,
to where I call home now.
Hey,
Thank you
that's
for
good for
everything.
me.
I mean, the plot is
As-
starting to make a little more sense now. A little bit.
Yeah, it's more entertaining.
And of course, he gets the dead girl right at the end. Alright, let's tell a little bit of a story. The year is 2013, and our story focuses on a woman by the name of Elisa Lam, a 21-year-old Vancouver resident who was the daughter of 2 immigrants from Hong Kong. One day, she took a trip to Los Angeles to visit the San Diego Zoo, and while there, she stayed at the Cecil Hotel. However, one day while staying there, she mysteriously disappeared and was then reported missing. Later, a video surfaced on the internet which depicted her in one of the hotel's elevators. And this video gives a lot of people chills. She can be seen repeatedly entering and exiting the elevator, making hard to decipher hand gestures, and it even appears as if she's hiding from something at one point. And during all of this time, the elevator never actually closes or even seems to respond to anything she does, almost as if it's malfunctioning or something. This video's publication piqued interest in this missing person case that eventually came to an abrupt end 5 days later, as Elisa Lam's body was found and she had been found deceased. Her body found drowned in a water tank atop the very hotel she was staying in. And that's kind of where the story ends. There was a couple lawsuits and investigations shortly afterwards, but many of them fizzled. The strangest and possibly most disturbing thing about Elisa Lam's death is that no one really knows how it happened. Was it a murder? Was it a suicide? There's a lot of evidence pointing in both directions, and both the authorities and the general populace could never really find a definitive answer. And that is the story of Elisa Lam. Now, why am I talking about a story like this, you may ask? Well, to put it bluntly, Sammy Pak, a major character in Y2K, mind you, is a direct reference to this story. And a lot of people don't like it. And I also have to mention at this point that this isn't a case of people taking a dev's words out of context or putting words in their mouths or maybe one big coincidence where people are reading way too deep into something. No, the devs have admitted this in interviews as well as some Reddit AMA's comments that are now deleted for some reason, that Elisa Lam's story was not only just an inspiration for Sammy, but also an inspiration for some of the game's themes as a whole. Now, I have to admit, kind of like a lot of stuff in this game that I heard was bad, when I was going in for the first time, I was kind of curious as to why people hated it so much. I mean, heck, film, books, television, and yes, even video games constantly take inspiration from real world and even occasionally dark events and tragedies for their very fictional narrative. And in fact, Y2K wasn't even the first media property to reference this particular story. There have been movies, plots to television shows, and heck, even a music video based off of the disappearance of Elisa Lam. I had this kind of feeling going in that this must just be one of those examples of people being overly sensitive or something because it's current year and God forbid people are reminded of bad things that have happened in real life. I mean, I am pretty cynical when it comes to that kind of thing, to be honest. But then I actually got to this part of the game, and then I finished the game, and then I did my own research into the story, and my god, people might have had a point here. Say it with me, folks, because this is becoming a running theme at this point. What the game is attempting here is a really cool idea executed really poorly. And now I'm here to explain why. So, when you are making a game, or a movie, or a comic, or whatever that references a tragedy like this, it's always important to take a step back and ask yourself, why? What does referencing a real-life story like this add to my project? Is it symbolic? Does it serve the narrative somehow? Am I knowledgeable enough in the subject to depict it well? And even, could I achieve my goal without referencing a tragedy? Questions like this are important if you are planning to try something like this. Perhaps the game has a dark and depressing atmosphere, so likewise referencing a dark moment in history emphasizes that horror. Or maybe the game has themes about violence desensitization, in which case pretending like the names of notoriously violent people are normalized or even glorified adds to that. And I'm gonna be honest, sometimes you can just do it for good old-fashioned shock value too. Some reasons are certainly more altruistic than others, and arguments over when referencing something is relevant, distasteful, or even appropriate in the first place is a conversation for a whole different type of video. We're just kind of scratching the surface of this subject here. Long story short, it's important to keep your intention in check, as in the real reason why you are referencing a real-life complicated topic. And when critiquing work that does this, I feel it's equally important to keep this sort of thing in mind as well, because a lot of people aren't great writers. Something that comes off as distasteful or ignorant could very well have had the best intentions of mind, but just had been written by someone who should have done a bit more research first. So let's take a look at the intention of Sammy Pack real quick. Why is she in this game, and what about her story being so similar to Elisa Lam's is supposed to add to the story? Well, I've done some research, looking at interviews and the like, and I feel like I've boiled it down to two main things. Two major reasons for why the devs tried to do this, at least based off my interpretation. I could very well be wrong here. I mean, I can't read minds or anything, but this is how I at least personally interpret it. And if this interests you, I'd actually recommend doing your own research on this topic as well, because it can be quite interesting. And honestly, I love seeing what other people think of this subject. So, I believe that the two reasons the dev referenced a real-life death in their game is this. One, to raise awareness about this urban legend. And two, to expose how sometimes a single distasteful take on an event can taint it forever. If you look at the devs, or at least the words of their two main creators, they seem to be under the impression that the disappearance of Elisa Lam could have been solved, but it wasn't due to how it was reported. Allegedly, at least in the words of the devs, because I actually can't find the article they're alluding to here, interest in Elisa Lam's disappearance dwindled quickly due to the reporter who broke the story focusing more on the poor water quality the residents of the hotel had to endure as a result of the corpse floating in it than it did the actual disappearance itself. The gross out angle, in their words. By the way, if that story sounds really familiar, if you remember, I actually praised this one particular scene from the game where Hogarth and Rory tell you a story almost identical to this, with basically the exact same moral at the end as well. I love this scene, and the reason why is because it came off as a bunch of friends just having a natural conversation about this topic. I loved it, and I think it did a great job at getting the message across. If that's all that there was here, I feel like a lot of people would actually be praising this part of the game here for the small but powerful moment that it is, and also as a nod to a popular urban legend, especially people who love researching this kind of thing. But that's not all we got. Sammy is a major character after all, and here's where the game begins to fall flat a bit. One of the biggest problems I personally have with this depiction is that it just seems way too on the nose. A small allusion to the story here and there is perfectly acceptable, but this game goes really all in. Now, admittedly, if you've never actually looked into the story Sammy is based on before, it actually does hold up fairly well on its own merits, and it doesn't come off as if it's shoehorned in. To the point at which at first I actually thought it was this character who was a reference to whatever this Elisa Lam story is, mostly because it's one of the two scenes in the game that isn't voice acted, leading me to believe that it was altered later as a result of the backlash or something, but no. Once you know about the Elisa Lam tale, you've passed a point of no return, and you begin to realize that this B-plot with Sammy follows her story so closely that it occasionally comes off as a borderline parody of it. Seriously, you first meet Sammy at a hotel, and that's where the Elisa Lam story takes place, and the location of the game itself is roughly around Los Angeles too, or at least in California. But it also doesn't go all the way because, instead of having a meltdown in an elevator, she's abducted by aliens? What? Is that supposed to be symbolic of something? When you first see the camera footage of the incident, it's from the exact same angle the Elisa footage is from, and Y2K also features a water tank that someone drowned in. Now, the game never actually explicitly says that it's Sammy who died there, but it follows the story so closely that it's impossible not to make that connection. But the water tank isn't even in the same town that Sammy died in, which raises a lot of new questions. Heck, Sammy even appears to be designed after Elisa, both being black-haired Asian woman with glasses. Again, one or two references here is fine, especially since the moral you're trying to say here doesn't really have that much relevance to the story. There are plenty of instances of this in real life. But the game beats you so over the head with these similarities that you have to wonder what the point of it all was to begin with. They could have just gotten this point they wanted to make across solely with the water tower scene alone, if that was their only goal, that is. If that was their only goal, then Sammy fundamentally didn't even need to exist in this game. Oh, but she does exist, and there are even more distasteful things the devs do with this character. Something I have neglected to mention up until now, and for good reason, because I feel like I did need to isolate it for this one moment, and that is, well, Sammy is also the love interest of the game. Alex gets like 3 girlfriends throughout the game, at least one of which is made of plastic, if you know what I mean, but like, Alex's main drive for going on this game's adventure in the first place is to find and rescue Sammy. And in both the normal ending and the secret ending, you meet her one last time as a ghost. One of which even implies that you spend the rest of your lives together hugging with an elevator in the background. What? I shouldn't have to explain why a love interest being based off a victim of a tragedy has a particularly yikes kind of vibe to it, but that's not even the worst part of it. The worst part, and take this with a grain of salt, is that I have heard a lot of people accuse Alex, the protagonist that gets the dead girl, of being a self-insert of the main dev, which is something I personally didn't believe at first. Until I saw a picture of the guy. What in the world? Like, bro, you couldn't have at least changed the facial here? He's practically a caricature of you. I once saw a line from an interview where one of the devs claims they did so much research on the Elisa Lam story that they began to feel like they knew her personally or something. Like, what the heck is going on? Even if this wasn't the intention, it all just comes off as supremely creepy and tone deaf. God, you wanted to raise awareness of this story by depicting it like this? I mean, mission accomplished, but at what cost? Were the articles in bad press worth it, dudes? Was a major plot point based around this worth being seen as a bad fan fiction at best, and at worst a confession that someone on the dev team probably wants to date a dead girl? I mean, people do crazy things for art, I guess, but I just feel like this whole thing could have been done better. God, moments like this make me wonder how a team made this game. Ackk Studios is made of like 6 people, and that's before even including the voice actors. Did no one else step in at any point and ask if maybe they were going a bit too far here? Who knows, maybe this is just one of those cases of a single person having a little too much power. You know, while we're on the subject of stuff this game got a lot of flack for, I really want to talk a little bit more about Alex himself, because Alex is kind of notoriously awful. If you look at any review or let's play of this game, one common criticism you'll often see is that people really don't like the main character. He's pompous, pretentious, self-centered, and kind of an all-around jerk. But then, out of nowhere, the dev dropped this not so polite quote, admittedly, basically saying that, that's the point. Meaning that Alex is easily hateable on purpose. In other words, an unlikable protagonist. Oh, and this is a topic that really interests me.
I try not to cross too many lines, you know.
I hate Alex. No, Rory is straight up saying, I can get you a job, and he's like, no, I don't want to work at a VHS store. Like, bro, like... When writing fiction, you're often told that you want to make your main character relatable and likable, because, well, your player is going to be around them a lot. They are the main character, after all. They better be fun to follow because no one wants to hang out with a character they don't like. However, rules are meant to be broken, and this is a postmodern RPG, and believe it or not, a protagonist that is deliberately unlikable is a bit of a trope in and of itself. You just don't see it as often because it's untraditional, and admittedly, it is pretty difficult to write well if you don't know what you're getting yourself into. A really important distinction to first understand, though, is that there is a big difference between a character that is unlikable and a character that is unredeemable. Anyone can just say screw it to any pretense and write the most bigoted, racist waste of oxygen of a character they can imagine, but that's not really interesting. That's just borderline shock value. What you want to do is make a character that's interesting and fun to follow on their adventure, in spite of really obvious underlying flaws, or if you're a really clever writer, because of them. Your character could be selfish, greedy, too clingy, lustful, a bully, annoying, short-tempered, violent, incompetent. There's a million ways you could go here. Your goal is to make a character who the average sane person would never want to spend a day with, but would be a blast to follow in their own self-contained story. Another great thing you should strive to do with an unlikable protagonist is give them sort of an arc where either their actions or behaviors come back to bite them in some way, or they learn to be a better person. This part isn't required, but it's typically seen as a nice positive if it would benefit your story. Like, it's character growth at the end of the day. Alex Eagleston is certainly not the kind of guy you would want to spend a lot of time around, but to pinpoint his particular brand of unlikableness is a bit difficult. For those of you who have been to college, do you remember that one guy who forced himself into pretty much every friend group, but no one really liked him? Maybe he kind of had a holier-than-thou kind of attitude and reeked of never having worked a day in his life? Well, that's kind of how I describe Alex. Not necessarily a rich kid or from a particularly wealthy or privileged family, but most definitely from an upbringing where he probably didn't have to worry about too many things growing up. Like, a lot of stuff was just handed to him. Now, this is actually kind of unique as far as unlikable traits go. He's not a dick deliberately, he just doesn't know how well he has had it in life. And this kind of manifests in a very submissive and arrogant attitude. You can do a lot with this, and the game actually does have a lot of setup for it. He knows friends from families that, while well off, were never able to afford sending a kid to college. Friends who lost a sibling due to racial injustice, a friend in a dead-end job, and also a friend who lives around a run-down trailer park. There's a lot of potential for a character like Alex to understand how lucky he has had it in life, and being around people who are worse off than him could encourage him to become more compassionate or charitable as a result. That's kind of what I'd expect from a setup like this, to be honest, although, that's not what happens, like, at all. Okay, let's step back a bit for a second. Before we get too far into this, I would like to share kind of a thesis I have considering Alex being deliberately unlikable. This is just a theory, you know, let's call it a game theory, if you will, that Alex was not designed to be an unlikable protagonist, but when the game released and players and reviewers alike absolutely hated him, the dev then said he was to save face. That sounds like a bit of a big accusation, but hear me out, because I actually have a few reasons here. Firstly, now, this is going off the Alex is a self-insert theory I mentioned earlier, so disregard it if you don't really believe it, but like, who in their right mind sets out to make a self-insert this hateable on purpose? Really, the only times I see that done is when a character is supposed to represent a fear or trait of the writer, and it's framed as like a symbolic thing, but that's clearly not what's going on here. Secondly, despite the devs claiming that Alex is supposed to be an unlikable protagonist, he's not really written like one. Oh sure, a lot of characters do hate his guts, but instances of Alex being unlikable are often framed as isolated incidents, as opposed to part of a bigger underlying problem with him. And also, I have reason to believe that the devs actually want us to sympathize with Alex during moments where he is being a jerk. Like, the world's out to get him or something. Here's a bit of evidence. So, at the part of the game where Alex gets really angry at Rory and tells him that no one cared about his sister that died, the characters are appropriately appalled by that. Vella and Hogarth yell at him, tell him to back off, and they even have a bit of a falling out for a few weeks. Right after that scene, you have this really weird cutscene where Alex talks to his inner demons. I actually really like this part right here. It does kind of come out of nowhere, to be honest, but it's pretty good symbolism for the general thought process you have right after doing something awful. God, why did you do this? What life choices led you to this, Alex? Well, now she's never gonna like you. Of course, a lot of what they say contradicts each other, but that kind of works because in this scenario, you would be thinking about a lot of things at once here, trying to come to terms with what you just did. I see this scene as Alex recognizing that he did wrong, and then wants to improve, which would be a really beneficial way to handle an unlikable protagonist. Like, he starts the game as a jerk, and then gets better as he learns from his mistakes. This isn't the only time you meet this weird Alex cult either. You see, Alex is unemployed and lives rent-free at home. He's at least 20, by the way. Oh dear. And then, like, his mom is telling him that he should, like, get his first job, and he's being a big baby about it, prompting Alex to talk to his inner demons again. Again, these scenes are cool to me. They're a little on the nose, to be honest, but their purpose is clear, and they serve as a means to an end to what you can do with an unlikable protagonist. But then, you never see the Alex inner demons again. Like, ever. That is unless you count when they're reused as placeholders for the villains at the end of the game, but I kinda don't. That just feels like they're reusing assets. This tells me one of two things, and honestly, I don't know which would be more damning. Either A, the devs completely forgot about the story mechanic with admittedly a lot of potential after its second use, or B, these are the only two times in the game where the devs genuinely believe that Alex is in the wrong for something. And let me tell you, there are more examples of him doing wrong than this. He does way more bad stuff in the game that the characters either completely gloss over, or the wrong person ends up saying sorry for it. Like, for example, during the scene where Vella is telling Alex not to look for the mystical Ultimate LP legend, she also says that she can't come because of her work, and then Alex has the audacity to go, well, they probably won't really miss you if you skip work for this. Heck, I'll pay you for it too. Here's $30! God, thinking that a day of work is $30, you can tell he's never worked a day in his life. Even by minimum wage in the 90s standards, that's probably way too low. This understandably sets her off, and I really like how she digs him to him, basically going,
Look, don't look for that record.
Oh, I'm going to. You really
oh my
can't stop.
god. I like this scene up until now because it gives all the right character development.
Yeah, the entity was in my house.
No, not that. I don't care about that. That happens all the time. This...
But then, like, she ends up apologizing to him by the end of it? Really? Vella, you got nothing to apologize for here. Hey, speaking of Alex knowing nothing about jobs, can we talk about that for a second? So, like, after Alex's mom tells him that he should at least have something for work at his age, you know what he does? He runs around to, like, 3 stores in the hometown, barges in and goes, hey, give job. And then when all of them inevitably say no because he has no professionalism, interview skills, references, relevant experience, like seriously, he's never held a camera in his life yet, he expects to get a job at a place that sells really expensive ones, work ethic, initiative, or even a freaking resume, he just goes home and forgets about it for the rest of the game. Wow! God, I was just waiting, hoping, begging that during one of the future scenes your mom is in, she would just drop a, so anyway, how's your job search going? And he would go, oh, right, I was supposed to be doing something this whole time. But no. In fact, the game appears to double down on this, oh, a job is useless anyway, it's just a waste of your time kind of view. And I'm just sitting here like, okay, I get that it's kind of hip and cool right now to hate capitalism, I guess, but like, do you really expect to live rent-free for the rest of your life? You know, with all the edgy humor this game has, I am legitimately shocked that at no point does the game ever make a privileged white guy joke, because this would be like the most appropriate place to ever have one. Seriously, he grew up in a big house, not one, but both of his parents are like Silicon Valley CEOs. He took 5.25 years to get a 4-year liberal arts degree on his mommy's dollar, and also he can live rent-free and feel like a victim when people tell him he should be an adult. The game does acknowledge this a bit, to be honest, but it doesn't go nearly all in as some people might want it to. The specific word they use to describe him is sheltered, which, well, that's a polite way to put it, I guess. You know, a plot like this would actually open the door to a pretty unique character arc. What if Alex realizing all of this encouraged him to go on a bit of a journey where he grows up mentally and learns how the world really works? And when I say how the world really works, I don't mean like the soul space and Alex face meteor stuff. No. I mean like how to get a job or do his taxes or whatever. Or what my generation calls it, adulting. Because acting like an adult when over 18 is abnormal now, God, I hate the word adulting. Some of you might be thinking, wait a second, that does not sound like a really fun idea for a video game. But need I remind you, this isn't Earthbound-like. If there is any type of game that could make doing your taxes interesting, it's the Earthbound-like. One thing these games are always great at is making something super mundane really fun and interesting. Mother 3 has a bathroom dungeon. The first dungeon of Max and Autistic Journey is your freaking clothing drawer. Trust me, you can make this work. Can you imagine a DMV or IRS building turned into an RPG dungeon, where they make jokes along the way at Alex's expense regarding things he should probably already know? So, Alex, are you a dependent? No, I'm a Democrat. That's not what I asked. Oh god, guys! Ask your parents for jokes to put here, because this would be a brilliant place to put some quality boomer humor. And heck, a whole arc like this would actually be pretty postmodern too, since taxes and driver's license paperwork is like the last thing you would ever expect to have to overcome in a video game. But we didn't get any of that. Instead, we kind of get the opposite, where Alex is constantly wrote off as someone who's just misunderstood, and he's really a nice guy at heart, even though he clearly isn't. Like, he's a Mary Sue. It's as simple as that. And the worst kind of Mary Sue, too, where it's disturbingly wish-fulfilling at times. I was watching other people's videos on this game, and I found this one guy named Jack Sane who put it a way that I really enjoyed. The writing sets you up to think that where this is heading is a final realization on Alex's part that he isn't the most important thing in the universe. And then he becomes the most important thing in the entire goddamn universe. Literally the most important thing. He's the only survivor when the world ends. He gets the girl, the dead girl, need I remind you. He saves the world from himself. Seriously, the player is no doubt rooting against Alex at this point for being such a dick, but nothing comes back to bite him aside from, what, the end of the world, which he ends up surviving anyway? Almost like he was rewarded for being insufferable, by going down in history as the last important anything. You know what I think would have been kind of a cool twist here? What if instead of Alex, a different character kind of usurped his role of protagonist right near the end? It could be anyone, really, but I feel like Vella would have made the most sense given that she's clearly the most knowledgeable on soul spaces and Y2K out of anyone in the group, and heck, maybe Alex could actually die while thinking back on his awful behavior through life during his final moments. It'd certainly be an 11th hour twist, but something like this would have given the game a bit more of an edge to its ending, as well as even be a bit more postmodern by subverting protagonist rules so hard. Alex is insufferable, that's clear as day, and the game just kind of expects you to deal with it. Even if this was all intentional, it's a bad example of how to do something like this. He's not a more interesting character to study or follow due to his unlikableness, and nothing substantial really comes back to bite him in a way that makes him reflect on his actions, grows as a character, or even gives the player a little bit of catharsis.
I'm like the call, like, okay.
Thank you everyone for joining me on this. This has been... I needed some people here, else I feel like this would have actually drove me insane or something.
I think it kind of drove half of us insane.
I had to play it. Can you believe we're almost done here? That was actually the last major topic I wanted to talk about. So, with that in mind, I think it's about time we start winding down this grand epic of a video that went way longer than I expected it to, and start to bring this thing to a close. So, there are also a couple other minor things I want to discuss at this point that I don't think are big enough to dedicate their own big section of the video to, but I still think are worth mentioning. So here we go. The first of those is the puzzles and puzzle tools of the game. I really want to take a long look at these because, you know, I grew up with games like Golden Sun, so I can always get behind some quality RPG puzzles, but there unfortunately isn't too much here to actually discuss. I actually found it a bit disappointing, to be honest. So throughout the game, you get a bunch of these tools that are meant to be used to solve puzzles. These include your trusty Panda, Dolly the cat boomerang.
I think every game needs a boomerang.
A boombox, which is basically a Zelda bomb. The hair whip, which, by the way, they should have called the hair cut because it's basically cut from Pokemon. A skateboard, which gives you a way to travel fast and also hop ledges. And a flamethrower, which is self-explanatory. This puzzle tool feature was not advertised at all, so I was actually pretty excited when I first saw these and first got some of them. I began to imagine the crazy amount of clever puzzles you could create with these that would utilize them in creative ways for individual steps. Unfortunately, though, the devs didn't really get creative here. There were a lot of instances of tools being underutilized, only having a single boring use, or in the few cases a tool has multiple uses, you're only using one of them, with anything else it can do being relegated to a single use in the game. And heck, there's even a couple instances where the game expects you to use tools for things that it did not tell you that tool could do. Like when you have to trip a skateboarding Vella by intercepting her path with Panda, or when you have to throw a dolly through a doggy door that frankly looks like a background element. I'm not gonna lie, I did have to look a few of these up specifically for this reason. This could just be because, again, I grew up with Golden Sun, so my standards as far as RPG puzzles go might be a bit higher than most people, but it's still something I wish the game did more with. Something else I thought would be interesting to take a quick look at are all of the scrapped and unused content in the game, because I find that kind of thing interesting, and as you'd expect from an RPG that's been in development for about 5 years, there's a surprising lot of it. As early as the first trailer, you can see really drastic and interesting changes. You got simple stuff like the UI being a lot more basic and some enemies that aren't in the game anymore, likely because they were just placeholders at the time, I guess. But then you got stuff like entire dungeon concepts that appear to have been completely removed. One that really pops to me is this crazy looking disco dungeon where Alex is running around with a bomb like he's freaking Adam West or something, God rest his soul. And at one point they show a big robot that appears to be the boss of the area, and at one point the robot is name dropped as Sammy? Well, now I have even more questions. I found an old WordPress blog from the devs, and on there I was able to find images where Alex has a gray plaid shirt and a red undershirt. Like, they changed his design at one point. I'm kind of glad they changed it back, to be honest, though, because I think this is a better look for him. On that same blog, you can see a couple areas that did not appear in the final game, including a canyon with a weird rainbow floor, and what appears to be a cog-themed dungeon in space that overlooks Earth? Okay, the coup de grace I was able to find when it comes to unused content, however, was this video by a YouTuber by the name of Combat Lobster. I love that name. I don't know what they do, but you should probably subscribe because someone with a name like that can't make bad stuff. Anyway, this video is an hour-long showcase of cut content that's still in the game. Like, as in, through hacking, you can still access it. I live for this kind of thing, so let's dive in and see what we got here. Most of the stuff in this video are beta locations of areas that already exist. You know, like they're just primitive versions of those areas. For example, an old version of Alex's backyard. Frankton looked completely different at one point, and to be honest, is it bad that I kinda like the look of it more than the Frankton we got? It's all on one crescent-shaped street, so a lot of the stuff is just more convenient to memorize, and I kinda like the look of it more too. Some dungeons look completely different as well. Like, for example, the Essentia 2000 dungeon is, instead of a weird nightmarish nonsense, was based around the innards of an old 90s computer. It even has different music too, with its theme being, I think, a calmer 8-bit rendition of one of the battle themes. Personally, I actually kind of prefer this over the one we got. It just feels more unique, and it seems like there are some good puzzles here. They did make a good choice to change the look of the sewers, though, because it actually did look more like a real sewer in terms of colors at one point, as opposed to the neon Nickelodeon Cool Kid sewer we ended up getting. Although I do miss some of the puzzles shown in this video that were removed. Dude, there are some genuine good puzzles in these scrapped rooms. Why the heck were they cut? There's a part where you actually play as the Essentia 2000, and she has a crow? Wait, hold on, is that Marlene the crow from the mine dungeon? Heck, there's even an additional unused ending in here that is very different from the one the game actually got. In this one, it implies that the Essentia 2000, or... oh wait, I actually mean the Essentia 9802. Dang it. Has been trying to defeat Proto-Alex, who looks like this now, by the way, for a very long time, and her strategy was to just go around to different realities and find stray Alexes to come with her and try to defeat him. But they kept dying. And like, the Alex that you play as and the you Alex that you name after yourself were the ones that finally defeat him once and for all, I guess. This ending isn't completed, mind you, so that's just what I take from it. It even has a different final boss, and... oh my god, look! It's a brand new one of those defense minigames I wanted more of so badly. But he has 2 of them? Dude, this final boss looks awesome! Why didn't we get this one? Oh my god, in this ending, we don't get that creepy Sammy hug at the end, and Alex even admits that he's flawed and now wants to go back to his original reality, not to fulfill a status quo, but to help people and become less selfish. Oh my god! Guys, like, the 3 biggest problems people had with this game are acknowledged and built upon in this ending. This is so much better. Why was none of this used? This scene is even fully voice acted too. Like, it was practically done. What the heck? God, this is truly the game that keeps on giving. Is that a walking ladder? You know, for being in development for so long, the sheer amount they felt they needed to cut for one reason or another might explain why there are still so many glitches and bugs in this game. Now, I typically don't like to talk about stuff like this for a digital release because they can so easily be patched out, but this game has been out for the better half of a year now, and from my personal experience, as well as digging around through Steam boards, there are still easily repeatable, occasionally game-breaking bugs in the game, and it seems the dev have no intentions of fixing them. The game said 1.07 on the title screen by the time I was done with it, but I was only able to find information for like 2 updates. Like, this game's patch notes are not well documented. The first one came out about a week after the game's release, and it was mostly a balance update. I mean, that's fine too, I guess, but still. And the second update happened as I was recording footage for the game, but all I could find that it did was add this button to the title screen that, when you press it, just gives you a list of all the references in the game. That's unusual. My best guess is that they probably added this for legal reasons, probably as a result of this controversy if I had to guess, so there it is, I guess. Y2K uses written language represented by various symbols to convey its content. The earliest known written language is cuneiform. This is a reference to how humans record stories and pass along knowledge in written form. Okay, I get it. I don't know why, but something about that reads really passive-aggressively. Anyway, the bugs. Well, you got simple stuff like, I got this weird collision error trying to spawn Panda in between 2 escalators. This tool you can actually glitch into a lot of places, but I've never seen it break puzzles. But then you got stuff like the game freezing and hanging in ways that require you to reset it. I saw someone on Twitter have the game hang on them when the game was trying to load a battle. The game for me got stuck in an eternal loading screen right after the scene where Alex learns that Doomsday is coming.
It's not loading!
It's not loading the next chapter. The loading bar is gone.
Oh.
This is unbelievable. The cutscene right before this is like 10 minutes long, by the way, and yes, both me and my friends had to watch it again. The game crashed on me no less than 3 times. I straight up fell through the floor at one point. What the? I encountered what I think might have been a dead man walking glitch. There's a point where I uncovered both a chest and a lever underneath some rocks. The chest ended up being a mimic, that's fair enough, but when I exited the battle, the lever despawned? You need to flip that to finish the room, by the way. I've heard that having Roy die can actually break some cutscenes during the endgame. There's a chance that cutscenes that he's supposed to be in will sort of desync because like the game expects him to be there, but since he isn't, it plays the audio for the next dialogue box, but like keeps the one that's supposed to be out or something. I don't know. Roy didn't die for me, so I didn't personally encounter this one, but I have seen videos of it and it is very strange. The biggest glitch for me, however, has to do with one of the abilities in the game, and that ability is LP Toss. This is a skill you get for Alex kind of early. That's a basic group hit, shouldn't be anything too special there, and it wasn't really at first. But then I came across a large number of enemies in Vella's mine dungeon and tried to use it, and it did a bit more damage than I felt it should have, and then I used it a bit later, and it did even more, and then it did more, until, oh god, just watch. 1500 damage. Yep, that'll do it.
Holy
Like
Viking costume.
There we go, 1500 damage. Yeah, I'm just gonna, I might one-shot the final boss with that ability.
Jesus Christ, you're gonna obliterate him.
1600 damage. 2100 damage. Oh my god.
Jesus
it just
Christ.
gets stronger. What is this? Keep in mind, this is one of those games where bosses have like 2,000 health at the very most. I don't know why, but the damage on this particular skill is bugged beyond belief, because after a while, it became so strong that it could easily one-shot any enemy in the game, including several bosses, even when you do awful at the minigame. My best guess as to what's going on here is that maybe its damage is calculated exponentially and just wasn't tested past certain points in the game. I get that RPGs are difficult to fully test because of how large they can be, but this is just goofy. It even broke the scripting on some bosses and completely destroyed the immersion as a result. There are also a lot of things in this game that just don't make sense given the time period or locations when you think about it. Like, for example, Alex's weapon. Alex collects LPs, and they're his main weapon throughout the game. And when I say LP, I mean like the vinyl records, not Let's Plays, but of course only someone like me would confuse that. This is a really unique weapon for a character to have in a game like this, but the thing that's kind of weird is that LPs weren't really in the 90s. I think audio cassettes were more popular around this time, with CDs beginning to become super popular. At first I chalked this up to maybe Alex being an old school collector, but then there's like an entire countrywide chain of stores owned by Claudio that sells nothing but them. Might want to back out of there while you still can, man, because this franchise might be going the way of Blockbuster, if you know what I mean. I forgot where I found this, but I once saw someone online mention that it was super weird that Vella got a job despite not having a permanent address or a social security number, because I think she does mention that at one point. She's from another reality, and she might be technically homeless. How did she get a stable job, especially in a place like California, which probably has a lot of regulations regarding stuff like that? At one point you find Iwata's grave, like the guy from Nintendo Iwata. It's written as a pretty respectful homage to him, but like, he died in Japan in 2015. What is his gravestone doing in America in 1999? Did he time travel? Given how good that guy was at coding, I wouldn't be surprised, but like, still. At one point you go to a place called Flag Town that has a lot of flags on display. And one of the flags here is one of those like gay pride flags, even though I don't think those exist. Actually, hold on a sec, those did exist in the 90s, scratch that one. Okay, here's one that breaks my brain. So at one point Hogarth says that he loves JRPGs and then lists actual video games that exist in the real world and says that they were a big part of his childhood. Here's the thing though. The oldest of the games he mentioned here was released in 1993, and this game takes place in 1999, which would make it a 6-year-old game as of this point. How old is Hogarth supposed to be again? Because who considers something they did 6 years ago at the most to be their childhood? The only way that makes sense is if he's like 19 or something, but even then, he talks like he played these games when he was 10. A lot of this might sound like nitpicking, to be honest, although this game clearly wants to be regarded as some sort of deep art game, so I feel it's more valid to point out weird inconsistencies like this. The biggest example of something weird that doesn't 100% make sense, however, has to do with Alex himself. Now, as you've probably noticed by now, Alex wears a graphic tee, and you might wonder what exactly it says, because there are clearly words on there. Well, let's zoom and enhance and take a look. When you zoom in, you can see that it reads, "Sick of ordinary colors? Find some new ones. Ackk Studios, 2 brothers." Now what the heck does that mean? Well, this is actually a reference to a previous game these devs have made. A game called 2 Brothers. 2 Brothers, not to be confused with Brothers, the other game about 2 brothers, is a game about, well, I actually don't know, I've never played it myself. The trailer looks freaking awesome. It appears to be a top-down action game with heavy Zelda influence, although the game has mostly negative reviews, most of which mention that the game has a lot of bugs that the devs don't really show any interest in fixing. I'm starting to see a pattern here. So Alex's shirt is a reference to this game. Alright, that's fair enough. I mean, heck, if Nintendo can put one of their merchandise on one of their characters, I guess these guys can too. And I have to respect that they're not afraid to pay homage to their own game in spite of people not really liking it that much. Now that's dedication to your art. Although, to be honest, at that point you think they just fixed their game, but whatever. Indie devs referencing their old games is nothing new and is generally seen as a pretty fun practice, actually. I mean, heck, just like at devs like Edmund McMillan and Greg Lobanov, because frankly, I have lost track of how many times that blue-shirted monkey has appeared in his games, and he's probably going to be in Chicory too, let's be real here. This game actually references 2 brothers a few times, and for the most part, they're pretty neat. You have Alex's shirt, and Frankton has this statue in town featuring the protagonist from that game. But then they start to get a bit weird with it. The line right after Hogarth talks about those Super Nintendo games he loved as a kid, Alex then starts to talk about 2 brothers. In fact, he pitches the game. Like, he gives an elevator pitch and basically advertises it. What? Firstly, that is incredibly cringy. Yeah, one can argue that indie devs putting references in their own games is a subtle way of advertising in and of itself. However, how it's supposed to work in that case is that it's supposed to get the player curious to look up the game that's referenced in their own time. You don't literally insert an advert. Really, the only time you can get away with that is when you do it ironically. Like that one time Danganronpa gave the player instructions on how to go to GameStop and buy Danganronpa. Like, that's pretty funny. Secondly, it suddenly makes you question a lot of stuff that you're not really supposed to question. Alex talks about Two Brothers as if it's like also a physical game that you can purchase in this world, which is weird because that game released in 2013, I think. Though that game does have an 8-bit art style, so I guess you could argue that that makes it work. But then, like, you start to question, why is he bringing this up immediately after Hogarth talks about some of the highest rated JRPGs of all time? Like, Two Brothers isn't even a JRPG. Is the game trying to subtly hint that the game the creators of this game created, that has negative reviews, by the way, is as good an experience as the ones Hogarth just mentioned? I certainly hope not, because one needs quite the ego to do that kind of thing. You don't screw with Chrono Trigger. That game is a borderline masterpiece to a lot of people. Even people who hate JRPGs like Chrono Trigger. Like, it's one of those types of games. That also makes me question the statue in town as well. Really, the only time you see a statue erected in honor of a pop culture figure is when they're, like, really influential, basically. None of that stacks up, though, to something this game does regarding Two Brothers right at the end of the game. And when I say right at the end, I mean right at the end. So, like, have you ever played a game where at the very end the protagonist dies, but, like, that's not the end of the game? Instead, you go to some weird heavenly dream area where you talk to the Grim Reaper, or God, or some weird adorable dream cat or something, and basically you have a bit of an existential awakening before going back to the real world. Trust me, it's a bit more common of a trope than you might realize. Well, this game does that. During the final boss, Alex dies, and the person he meets in the afterlife is a character named Roy. Now, when I first saw this guy, I actually thought he was Link from The Legend of Zelda, because they do look kinda similar, let's be real here. Roy, though, is the protagonist from Two Brothers. Okay. Game, where are you going with this? Okay, I need to set the stage here. So, during this cutscene, Roy talks to Alex in this context as a god stand-in, which is fine, I guess. I mean, Two Brothers clearly means a lot to him. Maybe it also means a lot to him on a spiritual level, for as weird as that may sound. This might sound weird, but you know what? I've literally played a game before where someone claimed that a trip to Brazil is the personification of God, so whatever. That's not all Roy does, though. Now, okay. You can tell that a lot of the people who wrote these articles probably didn't beat the game, because if they did, I feel they would have mentioned what Roy does here, because it is unbelievable. Are you ready for this? At this point, the developer, using Roy as a means to an end, uses this scene as an opportunity to rant about people not liking Two Brothers. Yes, really, have a listen. Is that Link?
Hey, Alex.
I think so.
You don't know who I am, probably.
That's Roy. Who's Roy?
Not a lot of people do. But I'm gonna offer you some advice. I've lost everything. Trust me, I really have. I know what it's like to do everything in your power to try and improve your life with a valiant effort, only to disappoint your friends, family, and fan base. Life is hard, but
fan base.
It's important that you keep on fighting. You're not supposed to be here. You're not supposed to go on yet. I want you to go back, and I want you to fight. I doubt I'll ever get my chance to fight again, because some people have worked really hard to prevent me from finishing my quest.
Oh my God.
You still have a chance.
When I first played this, it kind of confused me, because, like, I had no idea who this character was, but as I did more research, this scene began to infuriate me. I'm kind of inclined to guess that what he was saying might have been a reference to his own game, until he mentions fan bases, and suddenly I can't see it any other way. What the heck? This might very well be the one thing in this game that offends me the most. Okay, so trying your hand at edgy comedy that falls flat is one thing. Heck, we've all probably done that. To try and reference a real-life death to bring attention to it but instead coming off as creepy, that's something else entirely. But two, in the last 5 minutes of your game interrupt the final boss to complain about people not liking your video games is a brand new level of petty I don't think I've ever seen before. Media poking fun at its critics that hated it, I occasionally see, and it's typically pretty fun. But something about how it's handled here just seems so desperate. Like a defensive cry for help as opposed to an aggressive stick it to the man. Like, it's like these devs are somehow convinced that Two Brothers is some kind of deep art game that people are just too stupid to get. And it's apparently a view they had in response to this game's backlash too. God, this is like if at the end of Detroit Become Human, Ethan Mars popped out of nowhere and went, "Alright, you gamers, TM, looks like I'll have to explain this one to you. You know, because you're stupid." This is something you stick in as an out-of-the-way Easter egg, not something your player has to see right before the game ends. Dude, Two Brothers has like 150 reviews anyway. That's not a bad sample size, and I doubt you got canceled either, compelling people to review bomb your game or something. And even then, 150 people is not even that popular in the grand scheme of things. Like, guys, you made a bad video game. It's okay. You can move on from that. Calm down, dude. It's not that deep. You drilled too deep! God, I've made a bad video game before, and while I will gladly reference it in everything I do because I'm too proud of the name Shepherdmancer and I love this Cat King way too much, I'm not gonna sit here and pretend like it's this deep, misunderstood art game that people just don't understand. Say what you will about developers like Phil Fish, at least he had the confidence to let his game speak for itself and leave his weird opinions to Twitter in that one movie about indie games. I have to ask, did you put this right at the end of the game just so people couldn't return it when they inevitably felt like they got tricked into reading what you really felt about the player-based? Oh god, dare I suggest, did we lose the good ending just because the devs needed to put this in? I don't know why this in particular sets me off so much, it just kinda does. And that's all I wanted to say about it. When I started this project in June, never in my life would I have expected it to take me on such a wild ride. What began as what I expected to be a simple and short review quickly became a rabbit hole that led me on a journey no game ever has before. I said this at the start of the video, and it's something I still strongly stand by. Y2K is a beautiful hot mess of a game in the absolute best and worst ways. Neither have I had such a mixed experience of a video game before. I want to love it, but then it does things I hate, and then I want to hate it, and it does things that I love. It's all over the place, and it makes it simultaneously a difficult game to recommend, yet at the same time, a difficult game to put down. All in all though, in spite of my criticisms and how off I've gone on this game in my video, at the end of the day, I respect this game. Like, I really truly do. And that's because, while it may be incredibly flawed, it's a game that still manages to surprise and wow me around every turn. I mean, it took 5 years to make. Even if you do hate it, you can't with a straight face say that an enormous amount of effort wasn't put into it. In spite of what some people who, let's admit it, probably didn't even play the game will tell you. God, how some people talked about that plagiarism controversy, you'd assume like half the script was lifted, but like no. It was one NPC, and it was probably meant to be an homage. In fact, doing some further research on it, it seems like that was actually the case. Just figured I'd throw that here at the end just so half the comments aren't correcting me on that. God, can you imagine putting a loving reference to something in your game and people accusing you of plagiarism because of it? That sounds like a dev's worst nightmare. And furthermore, regardless of the controversies, this game has left an impact that not many other games can claim they have, especially not indie ones. It has a unique style, a unique story, a unique cast, etc., to the point in which if you see a screenshot or a character from Y2K, for better or worse, everyone recognizes it. The game seems to have brewed a small and dedicated fanbase too, and I have seen some incredible Y2K fan art from around the world. Say whatever you will about the devs of this team, but at the end of the day, Ackk Studios knows how to create a breathtaking, iconic game. They want to tell a deep, emotional story with complex themes, and I can always respect that. And for this reason, this is a dev team that I can probably see myself following for a very long time. Because you know what? A team that is willing to dedicate this much into a single project clearly has the potential to make a masterpiece given the right tools and a little more effort in the right places. Y2K may not be the masterpiece this team will one day be famous for, but my god is it a great game in its own right. And heck, I can even see myself trying it again one day, because I kind of want to see what happens if Rory dies, or what happens if I collect all the collectible pogs, or complete the mine dungeon, or try to get that monster flute item that I completely missed. It is most certainly a guilty pleasure kind of game for me, but after spending this much time with it for this video, it is a game I do not regret purchasing and trying for myself. It may not be the greatest game I've ever played, but it is certainly one of the most interesting. And one day, these devs may just make that masterpiece of a game that everyone loves. Truly, I wish them the best. And with those final words, thanks for watching. Oh my god, I cannot believe I finished this video. This multi-part epic has been my life for the past few months, and it is so satisfying to finally be wrapping it up. I truly hope that you folks really did enjoy this, and if the devs ever do happen to stumble upon this video, because that has happened a few times after I make these big essays, I really do wish you the best. I know I was super critical in this video at points, but all in all, Y2K is a game that I overall had a positive experience with, and it is truly unlike anything I've ever played. And I hope, if anything, my opinions on Earthbound-likes or how to reference a controversial story or anything is helpful in some kind of way. Because if your next project is anywhere near as ambitious as this one, I will probably be buying that too. Before I end this video, I would also like to give a special shout out to some folks that actually joined me as I was playing and recording footage for this. You might have heard multiple voices from other people in this video. These are them. Some people showed up more than others. They were kind of busy, but whatever. Here they are right here. Go follow them if you want. It was sort of a private stream over Discord, and I have no plans to actually upload the whole thing to YouTube since we talked about some kind of private stuff, but who knows, maybe one day I can make like a highlight reel out of our reactions or something. As of now though, I'm gonna take a little bit of a break. And I also know what my next video I want to do with. It's a bit different, but it's a pretty fun idea, and it's related to a game that I actually Let's Played a few years ago. It won't be as long as this one, but it'll still be pretty fun, and I think that's the end of it. I almost forgot to say this too. Feel free to like the video. I promised myself I would only beg for likes in my big essays that take weeks to make, and this one took quite a lot of weeks. I am so happy with how this turned out, and I hope you folks enjoyed. So there we go. Thanks for watching.